Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. This is going to be our last podcast before the end of the year. Going to take a little break next week, and then we'll be back on January the 6th again with hopefully some more topics for you, some more interest. So today, what I had sort of planned to do was do a question and answer. We've learned a lot this year. There's been a lot of things that we've thrown at you and continue to expand your ability to not only stand your assembly, but operate your assembly. And so what I'd like to be able to do is to take questions on any of the topics of the assembly. Maybe you're having an issue within your assembly, don't know how to exactly handle some function within there. And if you'd like to, you can put your questions in the chat, put them in all caps for me so that I can see them easily, and I'll work my way through it. And if you have no questions, this is going to be a very short podcast because I know we are all very busy at this time of the year as well. So, today, we've talked a lot. We've talked about the mechanics of the assembly. But one of the things that we really haven't talked about was how do you put it all together, right? And so I know there are some assemblies that are working to kind of set back up and begin to get themselves straightened around. And what we have to remember is that, our assemblies are going to, from time to time, they're going to need to course correct. We're going to need to answer hard questions. And sometimes when we are wrong or we need to change something to suit our state a little bit better, then what we need to do is we need to take a step back. There is no dishonor in that, but it is also in the fact that we are still learning and we're still feeling our way around the things, the issues, the history, and as things come up, things may change. So I've got a banner running. I'm going to take it down because that's not today at all. Didn't realize it was still on. Probably what I need is a jingle bell, right? All right. So anyhow, one of the things that I always, recommend to assemblies is start to meet, get to know each other, get to know the character and the mindset of the people that you have to work with. It's the best thing we can do is to develop those relationships. We're not going to love everyone. We're not asking you to take every one of them home, right? We're asking you to work with them and be willing to open your minds and your brains to really grasp the things that they bring to us in their experience, their education, in their reading, and in their research. There's a lot to consider, right? So one of the first things I always recommend is that the assembly start to really get to know each other, start to meet. One of the things that the Ohio Assembly did originally, and we look back on it kind of forensically and say, wow, that worked for us. And we hold and still do every Tuesday what we call the Tuesday morning coffee or town hall. And we do that from around lunchtime. So we do it, say, from 11 to 12:30, maybe 1 o'clock if the topic is really interesting and we have the time. And so in that, we might look at Anna's articles, which she's written a lot in the last 48 hours again, and sit and explain them, talk about the history around them. Sometimes we've sat down and we've talked about maybe some of the issues in the assembly. How do we overcome certain things? What would be the ideas? And then we also have done things like originally we sat down and that committee was our first committee that sat and began to say, we've got this 4 pillars. We've got all these committees. What do we do with them? What happens? What is Anna saying about building our assembly? So we sat down with the How to Build an Assembly, and we started to insert the operational things that we needed to be able to actually operate our assembly. And then we started to write it down. And then we took it to our General Assembly and said, General Assembly, what do you think? Right? What do you think about this? And everybody went, it looks like the beginnings of an assembly, the birth of an assembly. And so as we continued to do that, we continued to meet that Tuesday. We kind of got most of the documents, the processes and the procedures together in the different areas. How we're going to spend money. What are we going to require to spend money? How are we going to have somebody prove that they spent the money on whatever it was that they spent it on? How do we hold people accountable? How do we do elections? How do we answered all those how do we questions in that Tuesday morning. Very relaxed, sometimes a lot of fun. And we would explore everything. We would bring up Anna's articles. We would bring up just research that we had. And that was the beginnings. That was really the discussion points that we began to touch on. So from there, once we started to really look at and were able to get the assembly to pull together and approve those ideas that we came up with and in the form that it was, then we started to build on and say, hey, we need a treasury committee. We need an outreach committee. We need an education committee. And people came and they started working on those things. Then we said, well, gosh, we're going to need, an elections committee. We're going to need this committee. And they would bring some of their interest and begin to put their information into the mix of everything. And suddenly we had nearly 3/4 of our General Assembly committees actually working. And then we said, it's time to tackle that General Assembly. We have people active. We have people engaged. We have people that are actually working on some of these things. Let's bring up our General Assembly. And so on Tuesday morning, we began to talk about, well, what do we need to do? How do we need to go about it? How do we organize a court? And that was one of the things that Anna at that time was trying to help the Alaska Assembly. And they came up with their kind of 4 points of Alaska Assembly court process, which was their self-governance, their arbitration, their living court, and then eventually their criminal court. And so as we began to look at that, we began to research, how do we fill this in? What does that look like? What forms are we going to need? Because court is, in our law, is based on due process. What is due process? It's process, right? It has it right in its name. And we had to determine what that process was. And we had to make sure that that worked for every single case, in every single situation. It was the framework, and everything that happened within it was what went on within the case. And so once we got our General Assembly up, and we really were beginning to do mock trials, and we had most of the operating things together and the documents together, then we turned our sights towards militia. Now, Ohio took a little different approach to their militia. We've taken all the military terms out of our militia. And yeah, some might say, well, it sounds very corporate, but we are very corporate. Our assemblies are incorporated without being incorporated. Okay. And we have to have some type of hierarchy in some ways without being top down necessarily in leadership, cooperative leadership. So it is it was one of those things that as we developed our militia and we developed the documents, we began to work on those in committees. And the committees came together and they worked on each of their portions. And when we brought it together, it's a completely viable process. Now, does it mean that it's all finished? No, it doesn't. And as we grow and we continue to add members, it will continue to grow and it will continue to fill in around the edges. For right now, we have to do what we have to do to be viable. And then, of course, once we had that pretty well going, we looked at our international business and we said, there are things that we can do. Somebody said, well, how do you do that without money? Well, writing notices to our state of state, beginning to bring them into check, let them know we are here. It costs a little money, but it's something that doesn't drain us completely all out of money, okay, without the ability to notice the state of state. So, our big component in all of that was our Tuesday morning meeting. And it was getting to know our fellow Ohioans and getting to know their mindset and exactly the goal. And we put the common goal in front, and everyone, for the most part, lived right up to it. We get what we expect, right? And if we lay those expectations out, most of the time, most people will rise to those occasions and those expectations. So that's kind of where we began. And you have the mechanics in all of the America Some Assembly required to be able to go ahead and begin to assemble your assemblies. To date, officially, there are 3 assemblies standing: Ohio, Virginia, and Tennessee. And, at first, you're always on wobbly legs. It's just like correcting your status and trying to figure out, what do I do next, right? I call those sea legs. Coming off the sea and onto the land, you're a little bit wobbly. And we have to work through that. And we have to depend on each other to work through that. So that's there's lots of things that we can start 2026 with and begin to realize. Now, Anna, if I've had the conversation, there are probably other ways to build your assembly. And as I told Anna, I said, my father was an entrepreneur, and his famous statement was, there might be other ways. I've tried 99 and I found 1 out of the 100 that worked. And my statement is, well, Anna, I've tried. I said, I've sat back and I watched 49 others, and we found 1 that worked for Ohio, and it's worked for Tennessee, and it's worked for Virginia as well. Now, did they put their own state character and their own state way on it? Of course they did. And we would expect that because each state is different. And the character of the people is different in each one. So, we have to begin to think our way out of the box and begin to think about how we solve those issues and how we come up with this thing we call de jure government. How is it going to be different? If it's no different from where we came from, why would we even want to do that, right? Each of us has a voice and a vote. We each have free speech and free assembly. And our assemblies have to develop organically. We have to begin to learn how to deal with each other and with people. That's not without its issues sometimes. Sometimes, if we were in the taverns of old, we would be fist fighting over certain issues. That's the way they settled it, right? Or worse. But we know that that's not the way either to do it. And we have to learn that language of what I've called the language of diplomats. to be able to say, hey, no, wait a minute, let's think about this. And let's question this. Let's try to take and really explore the concepts, because even though we may not like it, there might be a shred of something we can pull out of it and incorporate. We all love to be heard. We all want our ideas listened to and explored. And then if there's value in that in the entire group, incorporated into the things that we are doing within our assemblies. And so it's important that we begin to take on that idea that we're going to cooperate with each other, that we're going to learn to do the dance together. It's a little like a tango at sometimes. Sometimes if you're familiar with tango can be kind of rough and hard, and sometimes it's just smooth and even. And our assemblies are the same way. Okay? It's not necessarily our own opinion, but it's the opinion of everyone on our state. And we have to look for that. We have to be able to bring that out and bring that forward. Okay? So 2026, we want to see most of our states up. And if your state is needing assistance, we're happy to be there to help you and answer questions, and bring your questions here. You'd be surprised sometimes at what happens within the podcast. So I have a question here. Will you touch on jury pool training? Okay. So Nancy, with jury pool training, obviously it starts with just kind of a general overall training in what is our law. We're quick to say, oh, you have to uphold the public law, but do you know what that really means? What is our public law? Well, our public law is our Declaration of Independence, our Northwest Ordinance, the 10 Commandments, especially the last 5, which talk about how we're supposed to treat each other on this earth, 5 through 10. And then we also have to know a little bit about where the fence is with the Constitution. Constitution does not apply to us. It applies to the de facto government and how they're supposed to be treating us. And so when we realize that it's really the strict guidelines that they're supposed to be treating us with, it is why we cite the Fifth Amendment, for example. It's because they can't expect us to take and incriminate ourselves within our whenever we're in court. Okay, so it's important that we realize that that Constitution is where the fence is. It's essentially what we have to do to take and know what is their job, what is our job, and how do we hold their feet to that fire. Okay, so it's kind of important that those things are in training, but we need to know a little natural law. We need to know some of the maxims of law. We need to know the common law maxims of law, not the commercial maxims of law. Those do not apply to us. Okay. We need to know the difference between law merchant and commerce law. And all of those things should be being studied within your law education. Brent Allen Winters has some wonderful resources. And then there's some training of thinking, of logics. I always say, you need to look up Socratic methods of questioning. Because when you're on the jury and you're in the middle of a case, then you need to be able to ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how of questions, case questions. Okay. And so most of us are not used to asking those kinds of questions and exploring a case and applying the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And in your mock trials, it is one of the things that the jury should be doing, is they should be writing down the answers to those questions. And if they're missing complete details, then they should be asking about more of the details. Because you see, our jury and our jury pools, they're there to actually, provide the justice. They're not there just to take into consideration some precedent somewhere, because we don't do that. Every case is its own merit. And so we have to be able to ask those questions. I always kind of compare it to my experience as a principal with 8th grade boys when they pushed and shoved, and both of them had a version of a story. And if you keep asking some of those who, what, when, where, why, and how questions, eventually you get to the truth. You get to what's really true about the situation, because the details don't always add up. And sometimes it's on both sides, because we all see truth in what we see and what we hear, but it's not always what is true. Okay. So our jury pool and the training should come through law education. And our jury pool should maybe be being trained on the court process. Now, that means you have to identify a court process. You have to identify, and they have to be familiar with what those forms, what the things are that they're saying within the jury itself. Okay. And what the process is for jurors while they're in court and when they're in a deliberation room. What is the standard we're going to hold our jurors to? Right? What is the standard we're going to hold all of our court personnel to? And when you recognize someone stepping out of line, what do you do? We've been indoctrinated to look the other way. We've been indoctrinated to not say anything. Oh, we're not going to be the stool pigeon, right? But if we want true justice on our assemblies, then we have an obligation to say something when we see something wrong, unjust, criminal, whatever that might be. And as Anna would say, if you look the other way, then you're a co-conspirator to that. So we want to make sure that we're always touching on and continuing to work and educate. Does that mean that you're going to take a 8-week course and be done? No. Continuing to study the law, to support each other in the jury pool, it's going to take going over it and over it and over it until you can almost speak it in your sleep. Okay. All right. Hopefully that touches enough. I have a great list. If anybody wanted to email me and take my list of topics and things. Okay. All right. How are nuptials done on the land? Well, that's a really good question, because we know about basic paperwork on our assemblies, but few of our assemblies have actually ventured into what to do for, say, the birth of a baby, when you're getting ready to have a baby. How do you protect that baby? How do you protect the mother all the way through? That is one of the most vulnerable times that a woman has, is when they're giving birth to a baby. And how do either our significant others or the people around us who are supporting us in that birthing, how do we go about designing that? And so there are some ways to do that. And there are documents that you can have. There's a birth plan that we've put together that we use on Ohio. And then, of course, there are witnesses to the birth that you can take and have a witness. There's a specific form for witnessing the birth. There's even one that if you can get the doctor to sign it, you can use the doctor to sign it, which is more or less a certificate of live birth on our side of the land. So, we've even had some of our marshal at arms, sergeant at arms, who were aware that didn't exactly watch the birth, but as the birth was happening, was videoed in the room so they could be a witness along with a recording secretary. And then the recording secretary can certify the event, okay, or the coroner, either one. So there's lots of there's a few different ways that you can do that. But the most important part is, as you're preparing to have a baby, is you want to prepare for that baby to be on the land. And there are specific instructions and things that you need to consider. And then there's documents that can be obtained to be able to support all of that, having a baby on the land. Now, you have to be really careful because, complications do come up. And you have to think about that in terms of the complications of the birth process. And so you need to be able to discuss that cooperatively with your doctor or your doula or, whoever that might be that is assisting you in that birth. And you don't necessarily want to just do that on your own, go on your own, because there's too many things that can occur within that process. But there are lots of things that you can do to consider it, and lots of things that you could take and pre-plan and have a good plan, a good medical, not medical insurance plan, but a birthing plan that outlines your desires, your wishes, whether you want, any kind of intervention, drugs, any of those types of things, or exactly what your wishes for your baby. One of the most important things about bringing a baby on the land in a de facto hospital is not to name it. Do not even breathe its name, and do not allow them to put a birth certificate as in baby doe. All right. Don't let them do that. Do not consent to it. Remember, our power is in our consent or our unwillingness to consent. Okay. Makes them mad. So what? Right? Makes them mad. They're not going to get their extra bonus check on it. But, you have to be able to stick to your guns and stick to your wishes, and then move on with the happy birth that baby. Now, it's always recommended that you take and you make the announcement of that birth in the newspaper. Real short, doesn't have to be, but that's a public record too. And especially in the fact that in the newspaper, it gets archived forever and ever. You can go way back in the archives and pick up birth announcements and those kinds of things. Born this day at this hour to John and Kelly Jones was a baby boy, right? And they named him, Joshua. Please welcome Joshua Jones to the world. That's all you need to say. The birth is recorded. Okay. It's public. And then follow it up with a baby deed on our assemblies. Fill out that baby deed. And if you can get that witness of live birth, then you have everything you need to refute any type of issue with the de facto, even in the schools, because your certificate of live birth will have 2 witnesses on it, and 2 witnesses in any form of law makes it lawful and legal. Okay. All right. Nuptials on the land. So I'll show that. Nuptials done on the land. Well, there are also some things to do within our assemblies when we have 2 ASNs that want to get married. They want to join in union with each other without the state being involved. And again, there's some paperwork that you can do. There's a solemn proclamation of marriage on TASA that you can get, or some of the recording secretaries have that. And you just need 2 witnesses. Again, it could be anybody. Doesn't have to be, your best man and your maid of honor can be anyone that attended, that witnessed you pledging to each other. There's considerations that you want to make, especially if you're older and you have assets coming into the marriage. If that marriage doesn't work out, what are you going to do? Of course, I think that a lot of people need to really be sure of who they're marrying and make sure that they're very well founded in that before they make that final vow. But they, having something before that, prenuptial type of agreement, if you're bringing in a lot of assets into the union, then, having that done before you take your solemn vows to each other, your solemn proclamation of marriage, that's a really, really well-advised practice, okay? Because in common law, marriages are seen as 50-50 from the moment you're married on, 50-50 for all of your property. So you've got 50-50 in terms of the physical properties, land, house, furnishings, and then it's 50-50 with any of your other property, your cars, your children, your progeny, if you have any, from the union. And that gets split 50-50 too. So if there's a split in the union, you have to decide how you're going to handle that. How, if that 50% custody, half and half. Now, if there's an issue of criminality in there where there's abuse or neglect or any of those types of things, then that may be something that you end up in living court over and the living court decides. But it's much better if you can go through arbitration and decide those issues, and be amicable about how you split up marital assets. Okay. So you do not have to have a minister to have nuptials on the land. Again, all you really need is 2 witnesses. You can gather in the backyard and make your vows to each other. And as long as you got witnesses to sign the document, you're married. Okay. It doesn't take elaborate anything to do that. In fact, traditionally in the past, they didn't do that at all. They only had the 2 witnesses. And a lot of times it was done just right in the family home. Okay. So I see an issue in the chat about some discourse in one of the assemblies. And I'm gonna make this statement. Anna's on Alaska. She might be the fiduciary. And she has the power to reset your assembly if there is extreme dysfunction or if there's unlawfulness in your assembly. She can, and she has. Okay. But when there's discord, Anna is going to let the assembly try to work it through. This is the maturing of your assembly. You need to learn how to work through your problems without having someone standing there telling you how. You need to work through your issues, to sit down and say, here are our issues, not whine outside your assembly, not drag Anna into the middle of it, but it's all the people on your state. Don't forget that. And as Anna said before, if someone is vetting, if somebody is not allowing you into their meetings, their private meetings, whatever, and masked as assembly meetings, then you need to send an email to her and say, they're not permitting us into the assembly. Our paperwork is on the assembly. Here's my paperwork. Okay. But you all have to realize you've got to stand. You have got to be the one that is the solution to your problems. Not angrily, not nastily, but you are the ones that have to provide that solution. And you have to say, this is not the right direction. Why are we going this direction? And how do we course correct it? Okay. So, we have to begin to talk together. You have a right of free speech and you have a right of free assembly. Use them. Discuss it. And all coordinators are Anna's employees. And if you can't get through to that, then maybe you do have to send Anna a letter. Okay. But there is a, sometimes we have in our assemblies a small group who's not happy with leadership. Small groups don't do it. It's not your way and the highway. But if it's a majority of the assembly, then there needs to be maybe a course correction done. And that's something that you're going to have to do and together, and you're going to have to be brave to do that. Okay. It's your nation. That's the way Anna looks at it. It's your nation. You need to take care of it. You need to work through the issues. You need to continue to discuss the issues. Sometimes you debate the issues. Okay. But ultimately, it is up to you. And it's not necessarily up to Anna. Okay. She's not going to intrude on your estate. Okay. But until you find your courage and you find the right words, it's really up to you to solve your issues, to sit down and say, here are our issues, and this is our wishes. This is the direction we want to go. Okay. And you have to stand firm in it, and you better be well researched in it. Back it up with Anna's articles. Back it up with process. Back it up with some assembly required in the episodes. But the more knowledgeable you are, it isn't just about, I don't like this, or I don't think this is the way it should go. It's, we don't like it. It's, this is the way we don't think it should go. Okay. All right. Oops. Back here. All right. So let's go back here and find. Does the committee chair only vote when there is a tie? Well, Betty, that's, typically on Ohio, the committee chair reserves their vote for last. Okay. We're not trying to influence people. And coming from the world that we came from, a lot of people say, oh, well, if so-and-so votes this way, that's the way I'm going to vote. And a wise leader is going to let people discern it for themselves and then put their vote in. Is there a hard, fast rule about the committee chair voting only at the end? No, there is not. Unless your assembly puts one in. Remember, we're creating law in our assembly and all the processes that we identify. Okay. But typically, out of courtesy to everyone, okay, the committee chair usually reserves their vote to either last or to a tie. And then that way they're not unduly influencing the rest of the committee in their decisions. Unfortunately, we still have a lot of people that watch for the leadership and vote that way. They don't want to think about that in their own terms. And so it's important that we give that breadth and that space to people to be able to make up their own minds and express their own opinions and their own vote, right? So it's more courtesy than it is anything in terms of what we do, okay? All right. Let's see here. Let's show this one. Which General Assembly officials are elected publicly and which are elected by the General Assembly? Well, our justices obviously are publicly elected. Your court clerk is publicly elected. Those two positions are both public positions, and they need to be eventually elected publicly. All right. And then you have some of the other positions. For example, court recorder. A court recorder can be elected within the assembly. It can be hired within the assembly. Most court recorders are just hired or appointed, either one. Bondsman is the same way. The bondsman can be appointed or elected by the General Assembly. All right. And then, from there, if there are assistant court clerks, assistant bondsmen, those types of things, those can be either appointed or hired by those main principal people. So our justices need to be publicly elected. They hold a higher fiduciary duty to the people. And so that and the court clerk. Now, if you really want to know who runs the show, it's really the court clerk. Okay. The court clerk has the bulk of the work to organize and make the court run. The justices are there to oversee the due process. They're there to referee and oversee the due process. They're unlike judges. They don't judge anything. They just make sure that the orders are written, that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that it goes out in whatever way it needs to go out and be served. So in that way, they orchestrate that part of it, while the court clerk orchestrates basically the process and the documents that support that process. So, and you've got other people in that might be there. Your marshal at arms is elected or appointed, can be elected or appointed, but the marshal at arms comes from your General Assembly, essentially. So their position is done from there. So whether that's at the state level or at the county level, marshal at arms is always an employee of, in a way, the General Assembly. Okay. All right. Okay. What does a small wedding ceremony on the land look like? Is a minister required? Just vows in front of at least witnesses and a recording secretary? Well, actually, if you have two witnesses, you don't need a recording secretary. Your witnesses are good enough. And yeah, a small wedding could be just a group of friends or a group of family. In the old days, they used to do it in the family home. They might have done it in the backyard. They might have had a small dinner or a picnic supper to go with it. And that's it. Okay. Again, there's some proclamations that can be signed then by your witnesses. You can publish it in the newspaper, publish it on one of the recording and publishing sites like the LRO. And so just really simple. And it doesn't require a minister. It doesn't require a recording secretary, as long as you've got at least two witnesses. Okay. The relationship, the union is between you and God. He's watching already. Okay. And so it's really just a matter of between the two of you, plain and simple. Okay. Right. Is it beneficial to get remarried on the land and soil after just celebrating our 40th on the de facto? Well, there is some forms that you can do that revocates the original marriage certificate. And you can send that into your Secretary of State. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and, decide to renew your vows or have a short marriage ceremony with friends to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary. And then sign your marriage proclamation with that and get your witnesses right then and there. Turn that in to be published on your account, and you're done. Okay. So, so I would really recommend, and still, because we have to negotiate two worlds. So for many of us, depending on what age you are, at 40 years, you're still in need of applying for individual or joint insurance under an employer. And they have to have something to show the insurance company to prove you're married, right? So having that witness, that proclamation, that witnessed and published is essentially the way around that, to be able to qualify for the insurance from the insurance companies. Most of them will accept that. Okay. So it's good to cover you. And, the other way that helps is, in terms of any other issues that might come up that are on the legal side of things, you have that proclamation, witness proclamation to be able to depend on in terms of the other functions of legal commercial world. Okay. So that's always a really good way to do it as well, is to do the revocation and then turn around and get remarried right away. Okay. All right. All right. So, so I see somebody make comment about, am I in my bedroom? Well, right now I am not at home. I'm traveling and staying with family. And so the family area is pretty noisy. So yes, I'm back in a bedroom doing the podcast. All right. What notice do you use on your employer and IRS over an IRS lien? Well, I would really recommend that you use the conditional acceptance. We all know that they get into our trusts. And with that and the conditional acceptance language, you might have to tweak it just a little bit. But it's really beneficial to use that. If you're not familiar with that, you should be talking to your coordinator or to your assembly or to a recording secretary to find out what that process really is. Your jural assembly should know that process. That's one of the things that your litigation team should have and have advantage to. Okay. And, fighting the IRS takes crafting some language, crafting, some notices back to them. Okay. I'm not a fan of ignoring it. I'll be honest with you. If I get something, then we rebut it. Oh, you didn't file. Well, I didn't have any federal income. I don't work for the government. Thanks very much. Do you? Because Trump has said you're not a part of the government. So you're not entitled to any of these things. So who are you? Do I have a contract with you? So yeah, how you handle that is you need to get with your litigation team on your assembly and begin to get the flow of documents that are out there for doing that. All right. If a woman is on the land and then gets remarried and she wishes to change her name, which docs are pertinent? Assume name. Well, so that's a really interesting comment. So where is your name registered? It's registered in the de facto, in their probate court. And in order to change your name to legally, so that you can keep hold of and grasp on your trusts, you would have to go back to probate court and change your name there. However, you can use a name. So, let's say you had a former marriage and now you're remarried and you want to go by that name. You can add those names to a certificate of assumed names and just use the name. It's a name. It really doesn't belong to us or really explain who we are. It's not really our family in many ways. So basically, if you want it legal and on your driver's license, then you'll have to go back to probate. If you want it just lawful and you want to keep using it, just do a certificate of assumed names and an expatriation, right? So you're going to do your expats that way as well. All right. So that's really the simple way to do it. And then that way it's always, you always have claim to that name in the way you're using it. Okay. All right. Who elects the public notary? Okay, so public notaries can be used in land jurisdiction as well as in de facto jurisdiction. And the way the de facto, look at the way the de facto does a public notary. They have to be endorsed by an attorney, and then they're registered through basically the bar association, but they're done at the request of an attorney, and they take a test and they pass the test, and the attorney recommends them on to the bar association. The bar association is the one that registers them. Okay. Bar association of the state, I should add to that. So in ours, what is the equivalent to that? You have to think about that. That's the jural assembly. So a public notary is affirmed, not necessarily elected. It's sort of like being a recording secretary. We raise our hand and we're affirmed by the assembly. So those public notaries are affirmed through our jural assembly. They need to know, though, what they're doing. So just raising your hand and saying, oh, I want to be a public notary, your assembly needs to put together some type of kind of training so that the public notaries know exactly how to notarize those documents, what they're allowed to notarize, and then the assembly has to put together the public notary seal for those people. Right now, Betty, to be honest, there is no need for public notaries on our assemblies. Till your court and your land patent operations are up and actually working, there's really not a need for them. Recording secretaries can take care of most of the needs of the assembly. So until your assembly explores and goes that direction, actually goes through and puts together some training, has a really good idea of how they're going to use those public notaries, I don't recommend it. I really don't. Okay. All right. Great. Well, that's pretty much all of the questions. You guys made it really easy on me today. So So I want to wish you all an extremely Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, because we will not be holding podcasts next week. So we will see you in 2026. Please be safe, stay warm, and enjoy and celebrate. Really celebrate the season, and bring in 2026 with the mindset that you're going to get your assemblies rolling, right? Because it's only in that we really are able to really begin to claim our authority with the United States of America and with our states of organizations, is that we stand, and we stand firmly. So please let me know if you have any other needs or whatever. Always happy to come out and speak to your assemblies. And again, I wish you a very Merry holidays, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. All right. See you in 2026.